Once upon a time, long, long ago, in a land of sunshine and honey, there lived a king named Solomon. He was not just any king. He was the wisest and richest king the world had ever known. Stories of his incredible wealth traveled on the wind, reaching the farthest corners of the earth. People would whisper about his treasures, his palaces, and his magical kingdom. Imagine a ruler so clever that he could understand the secrets of the world, and so rich that everything he touched seemed to turn to gold. This was King Solomon, and his story is like a fairy tale come true, a legend passed down through generations. We learn about King Solomon's riches from a very old and special book, the Bible. It tells us that every single year a mountain of gold arrived at his palace. This wasn't just a few coins or a small chest. It was a massive amount of gold, weighing 666 talents. That sounds like a big number, doesn't it? Well, it was. A talent was a very heavy weight in those ancient days. To understand just how much gold this was, imagine a herd of 25 elephants. That's how heavy the gold was that Solomon received each year. It was a river of gold that never stopped flowing into his kingdom. If we tried to count that gold in today's money, the numbers would be too big to even imagine. It would be billions and billions of dollars, more than enough to buy every toy, every castle, and every sweet treat in the entire world. This incredible fortune wasn't just found in a treasure chest. It was a constant stream of wealth that made Solomon's kingdom shine brighter than the midday sun. The Bible says this gold came to him every year, a sign of his great power and favor. It was a treasure so vast it almost sounds like something from a magical story, a gift from the heavens themselves. So, where did all this gold come from? The stories tell us it was a reward for his great wisdom. When Solomon first became king, God asked him what he wanted most in the world. Instead of asking for riches or a long life, Solomon asked for wisdom to rule his people with fairness and kindness. God was so pleased with his humble wish that he gave him not only wisdom, but also riches beyond anyone's wildest dreams. And so, the legend of King Solomon began, a story of a wise ruler whose heart was as golden as the treasures that filled his magnificent kingdom. King Solomon's treasures didn't just appear out of thin air. Kings, queens, and wealthy merchants from all over the world would travel for many months just to meet him. They had heard stories of his great wisdom and wanted to see his glorious kingdom for themselves. When they came, they did not arrive empty-handed. They brought with them the most wonderful and precious gifts you could ever imagine. Camels would form long lines outside his palace gates, their backs piled high with spices, jewels, and fine fabrics. It was a parade of wonders, a testament to the respect everyone had for the great king. One of the most famous visitors was the Queen of Sheba. She came from a faraway land in the south, a place filled with exotic spices and rare treasures. She had heard tales of Solomon's wisdom and wanted to test him with difficult riddles. When she arrived, she brought a magnificent caravan loaded with gifts. She gave Solomon 120 talents of gold, which is like adding a few more elephants to his yearly collection. She also brought spices so rare that they had never been seen in his kingdom before, along with precious stones that sparkled like 1,000 stars. Solomon answered all her questions, and she was amazed by his wisdom and the splendor of his court. But the Queen of Sheba wasn't the only one. Kings from all nations sent him gifts as a sign of friendship and respect. They sent him horses and chariots from Egypt, fine linen and special woods. Traders who sailed the high seas would also bring their best goods to Solomon's markets. They knew that in his kingdom, they would find a great king who appreciated beautiful things. These gifts were a form of tribute, a way for other rulers to show that they honored Solomon's power. His kingdom became a gathering place for the world's most amazing treasures, a crossroads of wealth and wonder. Imagine being a child in Solomon's city, watching these grand processions arrive. You would see people from lands you had only heard about in stories, dressed in colorful robes and speaking in strange tongues. They would unload chests overflowing with shimmering jewels, fragrant spices that made the air smell sweet, and bolts of silk that felt softer than a cloud. Every day brought new wonders to the city. Solomon's kingdom was not just rich, it was a vibrant, bustling place where the entire world came to share its beauty and its bounty, all in honor of the wise King Solomon. Now let's wander through King Solomon's magical city. The most amazing buildings were his own palace and the great temple he built for God. These were not made of ordinary stone and wood, oh no, they were covered in gold. The Bible tells us that Solomon used so much gold that silver was considered as common as stones in the street. Can you imagine that? Piles of shiny silver were just like pebbles you might find on a path. In Solomon's kingdom, gold was everywhere. It shimmered on the walls, gleamed on the rooftops, and sparkled in the sunlight, making the whole city look like a jewel. Let's step inside the temple first. It was a house of peace and beauty, and Solomon wanted it to be perfect. He brought in the finest cedar wood from a land called Lebanon, and skilled workers carved beautiful flowers and angels into the walls. Then, they covered everything, the walls, the floors, the ceiling, in pure, shining gold. Even the nails used to hold things together were made of gold. Inside the most special room, the Holy of Holies, stood two giant statues of angels called cherubim. Their wings stretched across the room, and they too were completely covered in gold. It must have felt like stepping inside a golden heart. Solomon's palace was just as breathtaking. It took 13 years to build his magnificent home. He had a great hall called the House of the Forest of Lebanon, because it was filled with pillars made from tall cedar trees. But the most spectacular part was his throne. It was made of ivory, as white as fresh snow, and then overlaid with the finest gold. 6 steps led up to the throne, and on each side of every step stood a golden lion, 12 lions in all guarding the king. No other king in any other land had a throne as grand or as magical as Solomon's. Think about all the things you use every day: your cups, your plates, your shields if you were a soldier. In Solomon's palace, all of these things were made of pure gold. The Bible says that every single drinking cup and all the dishes in the palace were gold. There was no silver because in the days of Solomon it was not considered valuable enough for the king's house. To walk through his palace would be like walking through a dream, a world where everything glowed with a warm golden light. It was a kingdom built not just of wealth but of imagination and wonder. King Solomon's magic wasn't just in his gold, it was in the exotic treasures he gathered from the ends of the earth. He had a great fleet of ships, a navy that sailed on grand adventures across the deep blue sea. These were not ordinary ships, they were called the ships of Tarshish. Every 3 years they would return from their long journey, their sails full of wind and their hulls full of wonders. The people of the city would gather at the port to watch them arrive, their eyes wide with excitement, eager to see what new marvels the sailors had brought back for their king this time. What did these magical ships bring? They brought back more gold and silver, of course, but they also brought back things you might only see in a storybook. They brought back ivory from the tusks of mighty elephants, perfect for carving into beautiful objects and decorating the king's grand throne. And they brought back strange and wonderful animals that no one in the kingdom had ever seen before. The sailors would lead apes and monkeys down the ramps of the ships, chattering and playing tricks. And most beautiful of all were the peacocks, with their jewel-toned feathers that shimmered in the sun like 1,000 tiny rainbows. Imagine the king's gardens, filled with these incredible creatures. Peacocks would strut across the green lawns, fanning their magnificent tails for all to see. Monkeys would swing from the branches of the fragrant trees, their playful antics making everyone laugh. These were not just pets, they were living treasures, symbols of a king whose power reached across the oceans to the most mysterious and faraway lands. The sight of these exotic animals and the scent of rare spices in the air would make you feel as though you had stepped into an enchanted garden, a paradise on earth created by a king of infinite wealth. So was the legendary wealth of King Solomon real? The stories in the Bible paint a picture of a kingdom so rich, it feels like a fairy tale. A place where gold was as common as stones, where wise rulers from distant lands came to offer gifts, and where ships returned with apes and peacocks. Whether every single detail is fact or a story grown grander with time, the legend invites us to dream. It asks us to close our eyes and imagine walking through that golden city, to feel the warmth of the sun on the golden walls, and to believe, just for a moment, in a magical kingdom ruled by the wisest and richest king of all.